Hello, and welcome to In Deep's Racial Equity Truthtellers, the podcast. In today's episode, we are joined by Ben Davis of the Wend Collective as he explains what it means to listen before problem solving and how to read a room. Without further ado, let's get started. So can you tell me some highlights of your career and your journey to how you got to where you are now?
Sure. I am a political consultant in recovery. I ran campaigns with partners and did public affairs work and advocacy work since 2001. And in that span of time, helped run some governor's races, some U.S. Senate races, some folks for Congress, ballot initiatives, raised the tobacco tax in Colorado, just generally followed my values and ideals in taking on the kind of work that I took on, trying to help folks achieve the kind of policy change that they were seeking. And if we were asked to do something that didn't fit into that mold, we turned it down. So I didn't work for a lot of companies over the years or corporations. Tended to work in the service of Democrats since they reflected my values more often than the other team. And then about 5 years ago, I started working full-time in my current role at the Wend Collective, where I spend the majority of my effort and resources focused on the issues of democracy, climate justice, and mobility equity, making sure that the choices you have and how you move around are a part of you having the life you want to have. And I would argue most people in America have one choice, which is to go buy a car and deal with it to make their lives work, and we're trying to change that.
Nice. And relative to your current position in work, how would you rate the importance of racial equity on a scale being like 1, low importance, and 5 being extremely important?
In terms of my full breadth of my work?
Yes.
5. I spent the majority of my career working on and supporting other people's strategies and developing our own for our clients. And the majority of that work was, they were really white-led strategies developed to be in the service of statewide communities. And I always felt like my values are where they needed to be on that front. Sorry for the background noise. That's my office assistant. I was always proud of that work and felt like we were serving the majority of people, but it turned out that I was kind of repeating mistakes that others have made, where they develop a strategy and then they realize we need to find a diverse coalition to support it, and they bring in communities of color, people of color, to support that strategy that they developed, instead of the reverse being true, where they have brought in communities, had a discussion about the solution to the problem, gained input from those various perspectives, and developed a solution that really worked for everybody. And so, the change that I've seen both in myself and in the work I do over the last 5 years has been informed by really understanding the mistakes involved in that approach. And so I've managed to shift my approach to making sure that I'm not walking in the room with my own solution, trying to make sure everyone is lobbied to support it, but instead, I'm back. But instead, I'm trying to walk in the room with ideas about what could work for solutions, but really I'm there to listen, understand everybody's perspectives, and then support solutions that are, informed and have kind of gained energy of everybody involved. Something that the Wend Collective does, I think, really well is we apply something we call advice process to everything we do. And advice process means you're talking to the experts and the impacted people, communities of any decision we're about to make. Lots of folks have tried to solve the problems we're all focused on, and lots of communities are impacted by them. A lot of the solutions that have been tried were not the result of listening to the folks who are experiencing those challenges or the folks who failed to solve them. And we try to always listen to both audiences in making our decisions. And very naturally, that leads to having a deep social justice perspective on, any solution we're considering on any topic.
That's really awesome that you focus on the listening aspect of it, because I don't see that too much in a lot of organizations. They kind of come to the table with their ideas, and you don't really get that two-way conversation with people who are actually impacted by those decisions.
Mm-hmm.
That's really great.
Yeah. Well, and it's a heads up for me. I thought I was doing it the right way, and in retrospect, I wasn't. I was perpetuating the same power structures that led to the same problems I was trying to solve. I think the change in approach is going to lead to different results.
Definitely. And what helped you come to that conclusion that you weren't doing it the right way?
I've had the benefit of working with peers from very diverse backgrounds, from communities of color, from very diverse professional experiences. And together we've helped each other understand one another, understand what it means to truly work in a way that values people's humanity and values people's experiences. And I'm, the beneficiary of, I sometimes joke I've had a 4-year graduate degree in equity and inclusion because of the peers I get to work with on a daily basis. I also, we started working on climate a few years ago, and we're not the biggest climate funder. Our dollars are significant, but more limited than a lot of the folks in that space. And so we wanted to be where our dollars would make the biggest difference. And in looking at the climate funding landscape, what I saw was the majority of the focus is on power generation, which I think matters and is a really important part of the climate fight. It's a very technically dense and very insular conversation between states, power companies, public utilities commissioners, and advocates, right? That's not it's not the easiest space to enter into, much less be informed and be effective in. At the same time, the transportation sector is driving the majority of the carbon emissions in this country. It's significantly underfunded in terms of identifying solutions to that aspect of the problem. It's an opportunity to talk directly to people and the choices they're making, which there are very few intersections in personal choice in the climate fight. We're all told our individual choices won't make a difference to the scale of the problem, and therefore, there's not a lot of opportunity to discuss, like, your choice to go get in a car with a combustion engine is contributing to the problem. It's an individual choice, but it adds up. So we're looking at this space and we're asking ourselves, how can we make a difference? And the transportation part of the climate discussion for us was an opportunity to do a couple of things. We could talk directly to people about their choices. We could tackle an underfunded part of the climate movement by focusing on transportation, and then we could also talk to far more diverse communities about how they could participate in that discussion and offer an opportunity to engage in the climate fight in ways that are authentic to the challenges and pressures they're facing. I think that for me was a really important part of expanding my perspective and in my journey, because all of a sudden we're in this space where there's just deep opportunity to talk to people and offer them a chance to design their own solutions to these challenges. That felt like justice in the climate space, was to offer that, be a part of that partnership, and get away from, the harder ends of the climate fight that really aren't inclusive.
Before we get into our next question, we're going to take a quick break to learn more about InDeep's Closing the Gap and how our listeners can get involved.
Race to the Board is a new program from the InDeep Initiative that seeks to place Black members on the boards of big green organizations. We are currently recruiting for our Black Candidate Network. So if you are a Black leader and a subject matter expert in any field, check us out. Visit InDeep.
Now, let's get right back into the show. On your experience, how would you describe racial equity?
I view this entire discussion based on this, very simple new version of the giving tree. Justice to me is recognizing that everybody starts in life from a different place. You might be the beneficiary of who you were born to, or you might not be. Justice to me is recognizing that because we all start from a different place, there are opportunities we have to give everyone the same chance at a great life. And that means creating the kind of structures, supports, access for folks that may begin life with less of a leg up and end life with more of one. And so I think about it a lot from that perspective. I think justice to me includes, equitable policy. It includes gaining everybody's perspectives on what will work for them. But I really feel like where there's a lot of talk about equity, equality, and inclusion, those are all really important aspects to it. I think justice to me is the goal. It's the opportunity for everybody to have a life that is fulfilling, is safe, is largely joyful. And it's recognizing the barriers to those opportunities and taking those barriers down. And I focus a lot on climate, but on the other side of things, our democracy program of protecting voter rights in this last election is as much about justice as anything. It's as much about racial equality as anything. Is making sure that just because it shouldn't be harder for you to vote based on where you live or who you are. And your voice should matter an equal amount as the next person's voice.
Exactly. So when it comes to conversations about race, how do you approach those conversations in your professional or personal life?
I think I tend to start wanting to acknowledge the privilege that I carry as a white man in this world. And there's a wide variety of ways to do that depending on the setting, but I often want to acknowledge that privilege so that it's not, so that it's on the table, and also acknowledge that I'm aware of it and working to put it in the service of others wherever I can. I think that's one way that I tend to approach it. Second, I really, like I said earlier, I'm actively retraining myself to listen first and offer solutions where they're appropriate instead of walking in the room with my own solutions to other people's challenges. That's a big component. Like many folks, I think I'm trying to listen for and be receptive to any perspectives on my own blind spots, because I continue to have them even with this great perspective and awareness that I've had the opportunity to gain over the last 4 or 5 years. It's fascinating to me how much work, how much effort is involved in broadening one's perspective and awareness of their role in this discussion around social justice. it takes daily effort, it takes daily awareness, and I think being vulnerable and open and acknowledging my role in it all, intentional or otherwise, is the start to great conversations and great solutions. I think it's those three things applied in all sorts of different ways in all sorts of different situations. But I'm trying to do that on a daily basis. And then one last thing, I think there's also this truth, this statement that I'm still learning. It's really good, because I think we're all trying to get it right. Like, if you're a good human, you're trying to connect deeply with the humans you're working with or serving or partnering with, and you want to get it right. Like, when you fail at that, which I fail at that for a variety of reasons, I try to tell myself, like, it's okay, Davis, you're still learning. Like, dust yourself off, get back up, try again. And that's hopefully what I'm doing most of the time, is that for self-forgiveness while trying to do the right thing.
I like that. I was recently in a conversation, and the person said instead of saying I'm still learning, she focuses on saying I'm still practicing, because it is something that you're actively practicing every day.
I love that. I'm still practicing. I'm going to take that. Thank you.
No problem. So when it comes to conversations about DEI in different spaces, are there any conversations that you choose not to participate in or avoid?
No, I would say more often than not, I'm avoiding structures that aren't tackling some component of that discussion in them. I'm less interested in aspects of the climate fight that aren't inclusive and aren't making time and space to be inclusive. Like, I'm actually avoiding those rooms more than I'm avoiding anything on the DEI front. It just feels less real to me,
Yeah, you want to get to the actual work and the problems themselves and not avoid them or walk around them.
Yeah.
Before we get into our next question, we're going to take a quick break and learn more about InDeep's Race to the Board and how our listeners can get involved.
Race to the Board is a new program from the InDeep Initiative that seeks to place Black members on the boards of big green organizations. We are currently recruiting for our Black candidate network. So if you are a Black leader and a subject matter expert in any field, check us out. Visit indeepinitiative.org and click Race to the Board.
Now, let's get right back into the show. And so far in your work with the Wend Collective, what do you consider to be your biggest accomplishment in promoting racial equity?
Our organization does not take on programs or partners without some component equity and justice. Like, that is a requirement we have of almost everything we do, direct or indirect. I look at that as, like, I'm really proud that I helped build that. I think, we just live by the motto that diverse groups of people solve problems for diverse groups of people, right? Like, that is the truth. On a personal front, we leaned in deeply around the elections and protecting voting rights. Deeply. And we worked in ways that created polling locations and prevented voter ID laws and did all the stuff that are barriers of access for someone to exercise their right in this country to vote. And our program was built on a foundation of equity and justice and was executed on that foundation successfully. And I could not be more proud of that work. And I look at the inauguration of Joe Biden today as a direct result of a lot of that effort, of making sure that people's votes mattered and that they were counted and they weren't discounted on the other end. And I couldn't be more proud of that. I think it's why the waterworks were flowing this morning, one component of it. I look at our climate program, like the first things we did, I took on the best partner I possibly could have with Joel Espino, who's a Green Lining alum, and he and I work on this program together. And he brings a deep background of applying equity and justice to issues of mobility and transportation in California and now nationwide. I look at the work we're doing with our peers in the climate community to build more equity and justice into how they fund what they fund. These are all things that I think are both, I'm really proud of where we're at today, and I expect a lot of these programs moving forward. I think they haven't reached their tipping point in terms of what they need to do.
So what role do you see the philanthropic sector playing in addressing the disparities related to COVID-19 and the current events?
Our approach has been direct aid. I think we are in the kind of the end of the philanthropic world that is working to do high trust partnerships and grant making so that we can really drive the change we want. We're less concerned about insurances against risk, against failure. We're very risk tolerant, very focused on innovation, and very focused on trusting our partners. And when COVID hit, that was exactly what we did. We did direct cash gifts to families in every aspect that we could, in every way that we could. We trusted partners to know the needs in their communities and how to address them, and we were allies in that work. When I look at what COVID-19 didn't create the problems we're facing, it put a spotlight on them. It aired them out in ways that everybody could see: food scarcity and insecurity, access to jobs that respect you as a human being, wealth inequality. All of these things had a spotlight put on them as a result of this pandemic. And for us, it was a big sign that we need to be doing more around issues of food access and education. We need to be doing more around economic security to make sure that folks can not only find work that they value and believe in, but actually earn a living from it. And so that's generally what we learned from it and what we did to address it and continue to do. A big component of what we did, I would say the majority of what we did were direct aid to people and trusting that they knew what they needed in their lives to address their challenges instead of trying to safeguard against them making the wrong choice. Talk about a power structure that needs broken down.
Definitely. And that is exactly what we need to move that needle for change. So I actually won't take up too much more of your time. We're going to wrap up a little bit. What advice would you give someone that wants to use racial equity or racial injustice as a lens for broader change in this space?
First and foremost, if everyone in the room looks like you're in the wrong room. Right? Like, it doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, what race you're a part of. Like, diverse groups of people can solve problems for diverse groups of people, and we need more of that. We need more understanding of each other. We need more of a willingness to listen, and we need to activate on them what we learn from each other. I think that's number one. I really want to see, I would encourage folks to explore higher trust in their work with their partners and peers in the communities they're serving. Trust, as hard as that leap of faith can be at times, trust leads to the kind of change we're all actually seeking in this world. And I'm a big believer in that. I would encourage folks, I would encourage my peers to identify ways in which their strategies, particularly on climate, but really every issue area has this. I think people reaching for things that can be measured, metrics-driven solutions to our problems, often is a red herring to the change that you're seeking. I think metrics matter, measurement matters up to a point. You can only measure a handful of things. And I think being willing to reduce the weight with which we put on metrics as a measurement of success and increase the weight we put on the humanity of the work we're doing, treating people like equals, listening to their perspectives, understanding that I might get in trouble for saying this. All the degrees in the world do not make you a bigger expert on someone who is experiencing a problem firsthand, experiencing a challenge firsthand. And being willing to listen to those perspectives and allowing them to inform your strategies is really key. And lastly, I would say, like, all of these problems we're working on are super urgent. They're all incredibly urgent. Like, solving climate is incredibly urgent. Economic security, incredibly urgent. Healthcare access, really urgent, right? But we can't let that supplant our willingness to be patient and let our partners and the communities we're working with catch up and participate in the solutions. Like, that's not, just because the problem is urgent, that doesn't mean that you don't give folks a chance to inform themselves and decide for themselves how they'd like to see the problem solved. And it's our job to hold that space, and we need to be doing more of that.
Ben, thanks so much for your time and your reflections on racial equity and justice. Also, huge thanks to the Wend Collective, which supports Closing the Gap, a new effort in partnership with Keisha Harris and Associates, and the Institute for Strategic and Equitable Development. Environmental philanthropies are invited to be part of a learning community that focuses on closing the gap in funding between white-led environmental and conservation nonprofits and those led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. For more information, visit indeepinitiative.org.
The work of the In Deep Initiative is managed by Keisha Harris and Associates in partnership with the Institute for Strategic and Equitable Development. To learn more about KHA's other offerings, visit khandassociates.com.